Bé, bona tarda. Abans de començar m'informen que pel servei de traducció simultània...
We begin. Let me give you a little bit of housekeeping devices. Channel 1 is going to be for Spanish, translation channel 2 for English. So you will say in languages. One for Spanish, two for English.
Muy buenas tardes a todos. Good evening, everyone. Benvinguts a una nova edició del FOTA Fans Forum. És la segona vegada que se celebra aquí a la ciutat de Barcelona.
Barcelona, taking advantage of the presence of all teams, all Formula One teams, which are here in Catalonia, in our country, because tomorrow, I'm sure that you know about tomorrow we will see the start of very important tests. These are the 4 last tests before the start of the Formula One World Championship in Australia. You need to be
poder estar avui en aquesta sala on hi ha gairebé 200 persones per poder preguntar als nostres participants, als nostres protagonistes, perquè el moment és un moment clau. L'any passat, la primera visita d'este FOTA Fans Forum a Barcelona fue un auténtico éxito, con más de 300 personas.
The FOTA Fans Forum in Barcelona came to for the first time, and it was extremely successful. This year we have even increased the number of participants showing great
així doncs, per començar, no em vull allargar més en preàmbuls, don't waste more time. Faig una petita presentació dels protagonistes, dels panelists. Començo per la dreta, no necessita presentació pràcticament, en Jaime Alguersuari, 22 anys, de Barcelona. Jaume, gràcies per venir. Pilot de Toro Rosso de la temporada 2009-2011, va disputar 46 grans premis, campió de la Fórmula 3 britànica. En definitiva, com us dic, no necessita gaire més presentació.
He needs no further presentation. We should have had a Chevy Pujola sitting next to him, as it was announced, but he wasn't able to come for health reasons. He has been at the hospital for a few days. Everything is fine after the operation, but he's asked us to excuse his absence. His priority was to be present in the tests tomorrow. We also have James Allison. He's the technical director of Lotus. He's a veteran of racing. He started in Formula One in the 1990s in Benetton. That was his home. Then he went to La Rose, then Benetton, and finally left for Ferrari in 2000. He experienced the golden days in that team along with Schumacher. Then he went back to Enston, the headquarters for Renault and Lotus, to enjoy the victories of Fernando Alonso in 2005 and 2006. We also have here Graeme Lowdon, President and Sports Director of Marussia. He is a great fan of sports. His father was a car collector, so since he was very young, he was closely linked to motorsports. In the year 2000, he arrived to Manor Motorsports, and he will be able to tell us more about that. He also participated in the creation of the Virgin team, which has become Marussia. And close to me, I have one of the main protagonists of this World Championship that will start in Australia in 2 weeks' time, Giedo der Garde. He's a Dutch driver, 27 years old, one of the rookies that we have this year in the starting grid. Well, he's a rookie to a certain extent, because last year he was also testing in the free practice for the Grand Prix of China, Japan, Korea, India, Abu Dhabi and Brazil. He was the winner of the World Series Barcelona 2000. He has also had extensive experience in GP2, and his motto on his website is "Don't wait for changes, take them." So we'll ask him about that in a minute. After this brief presentation of each one of our panelists, let's not waste any more time. Let's give the floor to all of you, because we journalists are usually questions in the paddock and during the whole Formula One Championship. So I would like to open the floor for all of you. This meeting is being streamlined in James Alleron F1. He's one of the cracks of Formula One, as well as through the FOTA website. You're free to tweet if you wish. The hashtag that you need to use is FOTA Forum or FOTA FOTA forum or FOTA fans forum, so please do tweet as much as you wish during the session, which will take a bit, roughly an hour. So if you have any questions or any comments, please raise your hands and a mic will come to you. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for having invited so many motor fans to come here. I have two questions, two actually, for Jaime Alguersuari. The first one, 2 seasons ago, the role of tires was extremely important. Tell me about this season. Do you expect to see the same importance of tires as last season? And my second question is, what happened this year? Why are you out of a team? Good afternoon, everyone. I guess I need to answer in Spanish or in Catalan or in English, whatever, whichever. You can choose. I'm sure that the question is not surprising for you, is it? Good afternoon. It is true that the change of tires was highly significant in Formula 1 2 years ago. And that's why I think that the change season to season is coming in more swiftly, more smoothly. Of course, tires change every year. The compounds and the features do change, so you need to change the car in accordance to it. We also have new regulations. But having such a change between two brands such as Bridgestone and Pirelli, well, that change was much more significant. That's where we found a highly important difference between the two seasons. And now all teams are experienced in Pirelli tires. All teams are extremely knowledgeable about how Pirelli tires work, even if there are differences year on year, but the difference will never be as significant as when switching from Bridgestone. Regarding the second part of the question, Formula 1 at the moment is working in a different way, different from the way I expected, and actually there isn't much to say about it. I'm happy with my position now as tire tester, and I hope to be back competing pretty soon. Further questions?
Sí, la meva pregunta...
Pole position, la pregunta.
Sortint de darrere, no?
Yeah, you're reaching pole position with that question. My question is addressed to Giedo van der Garde, and it has to do with the way Formula 1 works, in the sense that all teams are constructors as well. Let me ask you, would you prefer that Formula 1 would not only have constructor teams, but also teams who could buy big cars, so that the entrance of teams to Formula 1 could be more competitive, as happens, for instance, in the MotoGP Championship, where we have teams that buy motorbikes from Honda, and B teams and their riders have opportunities if they have the quality and they can reach, well, good results and even some victories, even if their budget is limited, as the case of HRT would be. I think it's very good for Giedo to answer the question, but I think that this is also a good question to address to the other two speakers, James, Allison, and Graeme Lowdon, who will probably have an opinion for that. Giedo.
Well, I think... It's of course, first of all, it's a good question, and it's a tough one because at the moment it's like this, and I believe how it is. It's not easy for small teams, but yeah, we'll see in the future what happens.
James.
Well, thank you. I've been in the sport for 22 years or so, and so all the time I've been in it, and most of the time I was watching it as a boy, it's been like this. It's been a competition of constructors and drivers. And I like it like this, and I would like it to continue that way. The key question is trying to make sure that the sport has an environment where a healthy number of teams can compete with one another as separate constructors. And I think that's the challenge the sport faces. But for me, it's much preferable that that it's a fight between separate constructors than a mixture of B teams.
Well, first of all, thank you for welcoming us to Barcelona. I just wanted to say that, and also apologise for speaking in English, but my Spanish is terrible. I agree completely with James. There are two championship awards at the end of the season, the Drivers' Championship and the Constructors' Championship, and I think Formula One has now built up a history of an important history that shows who are the good constructors. I think perhaps an area where the sport can develop and is developing is in the rules of the sport. There is a definition of what is a constructor, and there are certain components on a car that I think it does make sense. You know, you don't have to design every single nut and bolt on a car, and the definition of those components has been changed over recent times. I think will continue to be changed primarily to reduce the costs. So I think there are ways in which you can reduce the costs, and anything that reduces the costs, in my view, increases the level of competition, which is what the fans want to see. You want to see best drivers in the world competing, wheel to wheel in exciting races, and controlling costs is an important element of that. So that can be done without having customer cars. So it can be done through the regulations, where our teams are still constructors, and we can still, we still use our engineering expertise to try and design a better car than the next team.
Més preguntes?
Further questions here in the front
row.
In the front row. First of all, I would like to thank all the participants for being here. My question is addressed to Mr. Lowdon about driver Luis Gracia, who was not in Barcelona last week, according to what I've heard, because some sponsors had not paid their fees. Has that been solved? And as a fan, I would say that what's going on nowadays is not a good thing. The fact that Jaime Alguersuari is not in, and that other drivers who are not as good are in the grid, well, I don't think that's a good idea. If I pay, I will be able to race. If not, I will not be able even to test.
Well, it's not a difficult question, it's just a difficult answer. And it's a good question. What you've highlighted is something that's very important, which is Formula One should be where it's the pinnacle of motorsport. It's where the best team should be, the best engineers, the best mechanics, the best drivers. It is the best of our sport, and that's why people love it. And I agree with that completely. I think I don't think you'd find many people who disagree with that. The economic situation in the sport at present cannot be ignored. I, together with the rest of the management team in our team, have a responsibility to all of our employees, not just our drivers, and also a responsibility to our suppliers and everything else. And it's a very, very expensive sport, the way it is currently configured. So we have obligations to a wider group of people, and sometimes we have to make very, very difficult decisions, which we would prefer not to make. So that's really the background as to what you see in current Formula One. If the economics were different and if the cost controls were different, then you perhaps wouldn't see some of these things, and that's just the nature of where we are at the moment. You're welcome.
Més qüestions?
Further questions? There's one hand, well, several, quite a few. Let's start around here.
Bona nit. M'agradaria preguntar-li al senyor James Allison i al senyor Graeme Lowdon si tenen pràctiques o espais per alumnes d'estudiants d'enginyeria per fer treballar en pràctiques en els seus equips i quina feina li donarien a un enginyer industrial com jo. Gràcies.
No et diràs Lluís Porqueres? Ok. Perquè és una de les preguntes que havíem rebut via e-mail. Això?
I was going to try and ask James to answer that because we didn't get a translation.
Sorry, my fault. Do you have any room for engineering students in your teams so they can take some practices there? Engineering students and any opportunities to practice work in your teams?
Okay, I'll go first. I'm sure Graeme got an answer as well. But for people who don't follow the sport closely, we have lots of rules we have to respect on the track, and we also have rules we have to respect off the track in our factories. One of those is that we voluntarily try to limit the amount of money we spend developing the cars and the number of people that we have in our factories developing those cars as well. And that set of regulations, the ones that control our activities off the track, were a FOTA initiative. And one of those regulations, the number of people that we use to develop the car, we have to keep under a certain limit. But we have an allowance that applies to each team, which is that we're allowed 10 graduates, people that are within 2 years of leaving university or school, and we get those people without having to declare them in our main group. So ever since that initiative has been there has been quite a good incentive for all the teams to have young engineers joining the teams. So in my own team, Lotus, we have that 10. We have another 10 as well that we have to count in amongst our main employees. But we have a very, very healthy and strong contribution made by young engineers, and it's been a very welcome change to the sport over the last 5 or 6 years. A build-up of young talent coming in to a group that was quite a closed shop before that. It was quite difficult to get jobs in Formula One. But I think most Formula One teams, Graeme will comment for his, most of them now have this contingent of young, enthusiastic and extremely talented engineers joining straight from university.
Yeah, I would agree with everything James has said then. He's summarised the rules very well as well. Just with regard to our team, again, we're always looking for talent. If you go to our website, there are contact details on there. The world is a big place. It's pretty difficult for us to find you. It's much easier for you to find us. So if you go there and make contact with us, that's pretty much how we find people.
Lluís, si portes el currículum avui, doncs...
Your CV is here. If you have your CV around here, Lluís, you can give it to them. Basically what they say is that the rules are very clear and limitations are obvious. However, in the last few years we've had Catalan and Spanish engineers disembarking in Formula One. Xavi Marcos, a very young one, who was in Hispania, then in HRT, and he's now at Williams. It is difficult, it is complex, but you can visit the websites of the teams because nothing is impossible. Further questions? A question addressed to Mr. Allison. The tests you've been having so far, in the tests you've raced so far, is there a big difference between last year's cars and this year's cars? And my second question is, do you think that all teams are bringing in the improvements that they will be showing in Australia, or would you say that they will wait for this week before they do that?
So the regulations for 2013 are very, very similar to 2012. As a consequence, the family of cars that you see launched and testing so far this winter are pretty similar to the year before. However, in our own case, and I'm sure echoed up and down the pit lane, pretty similar doesn't mean the same by any means. Nearly all the bits on our car are different to last year's bits, and the car is aerodynamically significantly more efficient than last year's car, simply because as time goes on you find more and more ways to add downforce and get lap time. So although the cars are visually similar and the regulations are similar, there is a lot more performance in this year's cars. In terms of the bits that we will be racing here and then in Australia, everyone brings a launch car to the first test. Generally speaking, not much change for the second test. This final test of the winter is an opportunity to try to get most of what you're going to race in Melbourne sorted out. So most people will have an upgrade package of one size or another to run here, and more or less the car that is going to race in Melbourne will test here. In our case, we will bring other things direct to Melbourne, but by and large the Melbourne car will test here.
La meva experiència a la Fórmula 1 diu que
My experience in Formula 1 tells me that this sounds very good, but they then bring a new car, a whole new car every time. Further questions?
Aquí a la tercera fila, sí.
Third row.
Hi, my question is for Graeme. Everyone's talking about the economic situation in Formula 1 at the moment, and I just wanted to know how confident you are about, I suppose, the survival of Marussia. You've already had to make some very difficult decisions, letting go of Timo Glock. And I was here last year when Lewis Sala was on the panel, and HRT is no longer in existence. So I just wanted to know how confident you are that Marussia will be here in the next, say, 3 to 5 years. And do you think the rules are fair, or is there anything the FIA or FOTA can do to secure the future for the team?
Well, certainly we'll be here. I don't have any doubt of that at all, and the reason I say that is I have absolute faith in our management team. That's our job. A little bit like the earlier question, you know, you'll see difficult decisions getting made, and often to do with drivers like Timo, and it's our job to make those decisions, and we make them because it's very, very important, obviously, for the team to have a stable platform on which to build, and that's part of our job. So I have every confidence that nobody said if we came on this panel that they would get rid of our team during the year. I'm a bit worried about that now. You know, I think it was a real shame what happened to HRT. The sport needs to have a good look at itself when participants exit from the grid. There are only 11 Formula 1 teams in the world, and we certainly don't want to see that number go down at all, because you know, when you're watching a Grand Prix on the track, you want that diversity, you want that difference in teams and drivers, so can regulation changes help? Well, yes. The answer is yes. This is an incredibly popular sport. You know, I think it's the ultimate team game compared to anything else. It's better than any other sport in terms of what it has to offer the fans. So, you know, the one thing we do know is that this is a globally very, very popular sport, and so I think it's really important that we have the right recipe to make sure that that teams not only survive. You know, we shouldn't be talking about survival. We should be talking about how successful these teams are, and you know what the teams do and what they produce is you know, as I think is really fantastic. And so we want to see a set of rules, both technical rules, sporting rules, and financial rules that help protect the sport and allow it to grow. And you know, we know it's very, very popular sport, so we want to see that growth continue. And you know, I think, you know, with the right set of rules, it will do that.
Abans de continuar, se m'acut una pregunta pel Giedo.
Before we continue, I would like to ask Guido a question. We started talking about tires, and then we heard that there have not been many changes in regulations.
Maybe only 2 days with a dry track in Barcelona. Checo va dir la setmana passada, Checo Pérez
said last week that maybe we would have a Grand Prix with teams, I don't know if it's Marussia, Caterham, who could be stopping 6 or 7 times. Would that be possible this year, to have a 6 pit stop strategy?
Because everybody in the press conference with Checo said 7 pit stops.
Well, I think we saw last year McLaren was quite fast in the pit stop. So, McLaren was last year quite fast in the pit stop. So I don't know what they're planning, but we'll see. I mean, Alguersuari will probably bit the tires as well. For me, they have been quite good. They're not easy. And the thing is that over one lap, if they're new, they're I think very, very good. The handling is quite nice, and the warm-up of the tires is quite good. But then you have a bit of drop-off, yes. So it's not easy. I think you will see some surprises during the first race. But so far, I think the tires are pretty good.
És possible veure 7 guanyadors diferents a les 7 primeres curses.
But would you say that we could have 7 different winners in the first 7 races? Could we have a start of the season as spectacular as last year?
It's a hard one. I hope so. I think it's very good for the sport. I think last year was great to see. So yeah, we'll see.
Més preguntes.
More questions.
Moltes mans aixecades. Comencem pel davant. Aquesta noia del jersei negre a tercera fila.
The lady with the black pullover in the third row. My question is addressed to Mr. Allison. Knowing that Formula One will become an engine competition in 2014, do you think that you will be able to stand out over Red Bull or Williams, knowing that the Red Bull has a better engine?
Okay, I think it's probably not fair to say that it will become an engine championship in 2014. It's true that we will have new engines. It's true that that engine is very, very different from what goes before it. But the team that will win will be the one that produces the best combination of power unit, engine, and chassis. And the challenge of putting these new power units into the chassis is tremendous. Completely new gearboxes, completely new cooling systems, completely new bodywork, and there is a legion of opportunities to make mistakes in the way that you go about that. There's also a lot of opportunity to do a good job if you're able to. So I think it's a very exciting thing for the sport because it has there's an opportunity for the current order of teams that we all expect to be strong in a given season. There's a very good chance that in 2014 there will be a very large shake-up of that because everything that we've based our cars on for the last few years, you have to tear up and start again. But it definitely isn't just an engine championship. It's a car championship like it is now.
Encara en relació... Espero que acabi la traducció, sí. Encara en relació amb la qüestió dels motors, que ha obert ara, tenim una pregunta que ens ha
we have another question that has arrived by email. It's addressed to Mr. Lowdon. Tell us about Cosworth and the new regulation about engines in 2014. What will happen to Cosworth? Will it remain in Formula One? Will it be difficult for it to stay?
My understanding is that Cosworth won't be making a 2014 engine. Obviously, I don't work for Cosworth, so I'm sure they can answer the question. But that's my understanding. I think the 3 suppliers would be Mercedes, Renault, and Ferrari. And I think, as James has alluded to, and we mentioned it before, there's two awards at the end of the year, the FIA awards giving one is for the champion driver and the other is for the champion constructor. There's no award for the champion engine manufacturer, and I think it would be a shame if it turns into an engine formula. The challenge is really for the teams to see how they package this engine. It's an incredibly complex piece of engineering, and the engine manufacturers themselves are doing an amazing job producing these power units. They really are going to be technically quite something, and hopefully they'll make the sport more interesting, more exciting. It's certainly going to have a massive effect on the strategy during the races. But I think we'll have to wait until 2014 to see what the overall outcome will be.
Jaume, ens arriben més preguntes relacionades amb
we have more questions that have to do with tires. They are reaching us by Twitter with the FOTA forum hashtag. Jaume, can we have crazier races than last year, you being familiar with these tires? What do you say? It is true, tires change every year. Even if they are the same brand, they evolve year on year, and as far as we have tested, this year the tire is by all means more competitive and more efficient than last year in its different facets. It's easy to judge a product. It's not easy, to judge a product with just two tests. Not all tracks are the same, not all temperatures are identical, the roughness of the asphalt is not the same in every circuit, so we haven't seen it all about these tires. They are different from last year, of course. In my opinion, they are more positive, and not to insist on this too much, I would say that each start of the season is not as easy as the end of the season, because as the season goes by, you get more familiar with the temperature windows of each tire, and you acquire an experience that builds up along the season. As of race 7, race 8, there's less degradation, less wear. Everything seems easier for drivers and teams and engineers because there's been a learning curve. So I'm sure that the start of the year is not going to be so easy. It wasn't last year either, but I'm sure that things will settle and we will acquire this normality in a few races. It was even said that when Pirelli chose tires for the last few races last year, they took a more conservative approach. We'll see what happens. More questions. This gentleman here in the 5th row. Good evening. My question is addressed to Mr. James Allison regarding the engine maps. What we've heard recently in Twitter and in sports journals told us that both Renault and Red Bull had been told something about the engine maps. Has that had an influence on tests? Did you have to introduce any changes? Is everything clear now?
Okay, so on the engine maps, to be honest, it was clear at the beginning, it's clear now, it will be clear all the way through the year. The job of a Formula One team is to stay inside the rules, but to generally to try to explore the boundary of those rules as much as you possibly can, because to do otherwise is to throw away performance needlessly. So there are a set of published and clear rules about what you're allowed to do with the engine maps, and Renault explores those rules in the same way as the other engine manufacturers do. We were experimenting in testing on the last day of the last test that we went to with an engine map that we explained to the FIA what we were doing, shown them it, and seeing what it did on the track. And having run it on the track and actually didn't work very well anyway, We learnt from the FIA that they were not happy with what we'd proposed, and so we're not doing it. But that process is continuous. You explore the boundary of what's allowed. You don't do it in secret. You do it showing the FIA what you're doing, and they tell you what you can get away with, which is the reason why it's in the press that we're not allowed to do that, because we told them that's what we wanted to do. So it's just the nature of the sport.
Següent, si us plau.
Next.
Veig un senyor amb ulleres allí a la meitat de la sala.
A gentleman with spectacles, midway into the room.
S'està parlant més gairebé de la temporada 2014.
We're talking more about the 2014 season than about the 2013 season. We have the feeling that with very small changes in the regulations, this is almost a transition year. Question addressed to Mr. Allison. What's the degree of complexity added by the fact that you need to develop a totally new car for the 2014 season, along with the development of this season's car? Would you say that further down the season, this will mean that there is a bigger gap between the three teams that have more resources and the midfield?
The challenge of 2014 is significant. It was probably a bigger challenge in terms of our resources last year than it is this year. The dilemma is always how much do you put into the car you're currently racing against the one you're going to race the year after. That's the perpetual dilemma of a Formula One team. Last year we had the additional difficulty that we were having to consider the 2012 racing season, preparing the car for 2013, but also planning 2014. It's unusual to have to manage 3 projects simultaneously. So now we're into 2013, we're down to just 2 projects, so this year's car and 2014. So the challenge is somewhat simplified, but 2014 remains such a formidable hurdle that the ordinary amount of effort that you would be putting into next year's car at this stage of the year, the ordinary amount of effort wouldn't be sufficient. So we're having to put commensurately greater amount of our factory resource into developing next year than we would typically at this stage of the year. Now doing that means of course that you're to some extent hurting the 2013 season. Whether that actually hurts you on the track or not depends completely on whether everyone else on the grid takes the same view. If they are putting the same sort of resource split into 2014 as you are, you won't have any loss of competitiveness. However, if another team is either so much bigger than you that they can do a large effort in 2014 and not really notice it in 2013, then you can suffer. Or the other possibility is that a team is putting all its eggs in the 2013 basket, the last hurrah of this year's rules, and is prepared to suffer next year. But for my team, the right thing to do is to put commensurately more effort into 2014 next year than we would normally do in a normal year, because it is just a very big challenge.
In fact, we have 2 tickets for the Australian Grand Prix for those who ask about this season and not about the 2014 season. 2 tickets are here on the line.
Next one.
Next, there is a child here in the 3rd or 4th row. Would you think that there's a favorite driver for this season? Is there a favorite driver to win this season?
The strongest driver, the favorite to win the championship.
For who is the question?
For you, for example.
For me?
Yeah.
Well, I think...
To all of you.
Oh, okay. Well, I will start then. I think there are a few. I think so far there are, I think, a couple. I mean, of course, Vettel will do well. Then the McLaren boys, they look fast. Even the Lotus boys, they look fast. So it's hard to say at the moment. I think we can see exactly where they are and who's the fastest in Melbourne in a few weeks.
Well, of course, I'd like to say our two drivers, but we need to provide them with a car that's a little bit quicker. I'll be controversial. I think Kimi Räikkönen.
That's why, because you have James, you say.
Yeah, and he drove in our Formula Renault team.
And he has big hands.
I don't think that's controversial. I think it's a very reasonable judgment. What's absolutely clear from the first couple of tests is that it's close at the front. Of course, things can change because we're not wearing the Melbourne clothes on our car yet. But it was close last year. But the indications are that it's closer still this year. So I think it would be a very brave person who made a confident prediction of who was going to win the championship this year. Could be anyone from 4 teams.
All right, it's definitely Kimi Räikkönen then.
Sí, la verdad es que no hi ha molt més a dir.
There isn't much more to add, actually. I think James explained this very well, and I agree with what he said. First of all, you look at the 2013-2012 rules, and there haven't been many changes. The potential of the top teams will be basically almost the same. It is true that it's hard to see big differences, as we've seen this year. Everything will be very tight from the start to the end of the season, I would say. And I believe that all teams are very expectant about what's going to happen in 2014 rather than what's happening in 2013. So maybe there will be 4 or 5 drivers who will be able to fight for a victory. I'm sure it'll be all very tight. Jaume, I'm not asking them because maybe this is too difficult, but now that you are not on the starting grid, I'm sure that many people wonder, among this long list of drivers who are challenging for races and for the championship, would you include Lewis Hamilton, or maybe he made a mistake? Well, it's hard to say. Not all teams are on their Melbourne clothes yet. As we just heard, there will be many differences between now and Melbourne, especially among the top teams. They have the potential to introduce amazing changes in their cars, so it's difficult to judge where each one will stand. I'm based on what happened last year, thinking that the rules will not change that much, and that's why I think that there are 4 or 5 drivers who could opt for victory. I don't know if there will be as much as 7 drivers winning 7 races, but I still think that it will be very tight.
Vinga, va, més qüestions.
Further questions.
Mulleres i Bigot ha sigut el primer. Pole position ara per ell.
Pole position for this gentleman here. My question is addressed to James. We've seen that Williams now has got an aerodynamic rim as last year. Are you going to copy this? And if you copy it, how long will it take you to have this? It's the axle casing or axle housing. Will you have a new axle housing soon?
Okay, you're going to have to forgive me because I genuinely haven't looked at the Williams axle casing, or I'm not quite sure which bit you're referring to. I'll say a general thing, though. Every team on the grid is absolutely shameless about copying anything that they think will make their car go quicker. Of course, you are not going to be a championship team unless the majority of your intellectual property is derived at home. But if there's a good idea that's in the public domain that another team is showing, you'll just copy it as fast as you can, because there isn't a prize for originality, there's only a prize for winning.
Tercera fila.
Third row.
James and Graeme, what has been your I suppose, highest achievement in your respective roles as the Technical Regulations Working Group Chair and the Sporting Regulations Working Group for FOTA? It's really boring, I know, sorry.
It is quite boring, I'm afraid, because a lot of the work on regulations, if any of you had to sit through it, you wouldn't wish to do it again. We argue for hours on end about the meaning of a particular word, so it can be a bit soul destroying. But an example of something that went reasonably well was when it was clear in 2011 that the rules were going to change to get rid of fully blown floor exhausts. The teams with absolutely good intentions proposed a set of regulations to the FAA for how we might do that. There was then a short period, and that regulation was accepted. After about 3 or 4 weeks, the aerodynamicists had been set free on that new set of words, and it was pretty clear that they were inadequate to control the sport in the way that we had intended when we proposed them, and that problem was raised in a FOTA forum, in the FOTA Technical Rules Group, and it was argued through to a conclusion, and a modification was made to the rule that meant that effectively we didn't have to have a massive argument at the start of the following year. It wasn't very interesting, and it was very difficult to get an agreement made on it, but it was a reasonable achievement.
Yeah, similarly, regarding the sporting group, there's absolutely no way I can make this answer interesting, exciting, or funny, but I can make it short. Anything that we've achieved in the last few years to do with reducing cost has usually helped improve competition, and so I would say any one of probably 3 or 4 things, either to do with limiting testing or aerodynamic development in the sporting regulations. Anything like that, I think, has been a really good thing for the sport, and it's often unseen, and it requires a huge amount of cooperation between the teams. But when we do achieve a result like that, it's good for the sport, and ultimately it's good for the fans.
Ara marxem cap al fons de la sala. Abans una pregunta
Let's move on to the bottom of the room. But before, a question by Twitter addressed to Mr. Giedo van der Garden. What result would you be satisfied with at the end of the season, taking into account you're a rookie this year? What would you settle for?
I think, we are still a young team, and we just got a new CEO, and I think he will put everybody on the right place, and we will make steps to the right direction. But for me, if I can be the first one who gets a point for Caterham, I will be the happiest person on earth.
With these tires, all is possible. Everything is possible.
No, of course, but you need a little crazy race. I mean, don't expect us to be every race in the top 10. Yeah, we'll see, and maybe some rain, dry, good strategy, and then hopefully you get 1 point.
Vinga, ara sí, més preguntes. La part final de la sala que fins ara no...
From the bottom of the room, they have not had the opportunity to ask yet. Hello. You mentioned that teams copy each other. What methods do teams use to copy others? Any methods that are legal and that you can tell us about? And then to what extent do drivers participate in this quest for finding that difference that can help you, make a difference from the other teams?
Well, the biggest friend of the copier is photography. So there's a lot of photographers in the pit lane, and they make a part of their living by selling their photographs to all the technical departments of all the teams, and then we take those photos and we compare them from race to race, team to team, so that we can see the development pattern that other teams are following, so we can spot what bits they're changing on their car, and if they're getting notably more competitive and they've changed certain bits, then that's an interesting fact. But honestly, in a Formula One car, so much of the performance is right in the detail that even some fantastic photographs are not really going to yield the type of clues that you need to catapult your car forward. So it's a contribution to what you do, but it's not the be all and end all. As far as what the drivers do, well, they'll always take an opportunity to crawl over other teams' cars in Parc Fermé when they get out their car and tell us anything they see interesting. But drivers mainly drive. They leave us to do the car.
Ara que parla de fotògrafs I tal, aprofito per denunciar.
Now that you're talking about photographers, I would like to denounce what's going on with the tests, with all the TV channels on pit lanes. They come in, they close the door, and you can't shoot anything in the garages.
Why? I don't know.
Why? I don't know.
Well, in the races, it's forbidden to close the doors, forbidden to cover the cars, and there's a reason for that, and it's because the fans who pay to see the cars deserve to see the cars. In the tests, that rule doesn't exist, and because the teams are interested in their narrow self-interest, which is protecting their intellectual property, we keep everything covered. Frankly, I think it would be a good rule change if we had to keep everything open in tests as well.
I agree. Jaume, Giedo, els pilots us mireu molt els cotxes, intenteu transmetre els...
Guido and Jaume, do you really look at the cars very carefully? Do you look, for instance, at Ferrari and say, well, I've seen this in the Ferrari, maybe we could copy this? Maybe Guido could start and then Jaume. Do you tell your engineers what you've seen in other cars, maybe?
Well, sometimes. I mean, if you see something interesting, you speak about it in the briefings or at the factory with your team. But, you know, we are mainly to drive the car, to give the feedback as much as possible what the car is doing. And in the factory and the whole team is quite big to see that and to work on all the areas to improve it. But yeah, what we can see and what's something interesting, we give it through.
Jaume.
Sí, yo crec que, obviamente,
of course, you can look at many different things and you can have some little ideas that you can tell your engineers, but I think that in the end, this is almost like an aeronautical work. The work is in the air, so drivers cannot judge if that part is more efficient in the car than another part, because the car is designed in a totally different way than the other car that you're looking at. So I think that this task does not concern the driver. That's why we have photos, and even so, I think it is very complex and it requires lots of skill and experience, and I think that drivers are there to do another type of job. Further questions from the bottom of the room. Lady with the black jumper. Good afternoon. Question addressed to Jaume. What do you think about the high degradation of tires? Do you think it could affect safety? The driver's safety? In spite of the fact that a high number of pit stops are foreseen. My second question is addressed to Mr. Allison. With the reputation that Kimi Raikkonen has of being a very cold man, not very talkative, is it easy to work with him? Is it easy to work about the feelings he has on the car and to discuss with him?
Second one is more interesting.
Okay, aleshores em callo I no dic res.
So I'll shut up and not say anything. Jaume, you start.
No, jo crec que no...
I would say that it's not dangerous. I think it would be dangerous if tires would burst in the middle of a corner where you don't expect them to burst. I think that the degradation that you can see today or tomorrow will depend on the circumstances that you encounter, on the temperature, the track, and the compound, and of course on the balance of the car, and it depends as well on the drivers and the engineers, but I think that this is an issue that can be seen from one angle today and from a totally different angle tomorrow. So I would not take these two tests running two different tracks, Barcelona and Jerez, which are very difficult for tires, where you have a high wear rate, because you might come up with a different idea, and you could have a totally different scenario in Melbourne, for instance. So I wouldn't say that they could be dangerous, not at all.
What about Iceman and his few words?
Okay, well, first of all, Kimi's not a cold man. What Kimi is someone who doesn't particularly like talking to the press. But inside the team, you know, what Kimi does like doing is racing cars, and the team is a group of people who are there to help him race cars, and Kimi is completely friendly and normal, and just like you'd expect a young, good guy who likes racing cars to be. So the persona that you see is the one that he presents to the press, because he doesn't like talking to the press, but the persona we see is just a nice, fun, fast driver who's easy, straightforward to work with, who's completely his own man, and is not particularly interested in sort of pushing any sort of corporate line, which I think is why he has so many fans, because I think they can see that he isn't being anything other than himself. So he's fun to work with. I guess the only time when we see the sharp edge of his tongue rather than the fun part of him is he doesn't like people talking to him in races very much. He likes just to race. He doesn't like stuff in his ears, and so we have to judge quite carefully when to say and how much to say, in order to strike the right balance between telling him stuff he needs to know and not pissing him off. But other than that, normal bloke.
És un bon retrat de Kimi Raikkonen. Una pregunta.
That's a good portrait. But before I continue, I was thinking about Romain Grosjean. Last year, you know that a lot was said. There were some drivers who talked a lot about the attitude, especially at the start, of the attitude of rookies. We all think about Romain Grosjean's start in Belgium. Guido.
With this feeling that the young drivers must be patient and no prendre tants riscos a les sortides.
That they should not take so much risk at the starts, because there are lots of rookies this year.
Yeah, they are. Well, I think it's hard to judge about Romain last year, but I think he did a great season. He showed his speed. And he did quite well. Of course, he had some accidents, but that's maybe his little nature, you know. I've been racing with him in the past, and he likes to do some little risk. But on the other hand, you know, he did very well for his first season. But for us, you know, we will be. Well, we don't know yet where we are in the pack, but. Yeah, the most important thing is to learn as much as possible. I have an experienced teammate, and I want to learn as much as I can from him during the first few races. And of course, you have to respect the rules and don't go crazy on the start.
Un noi amb jersei negre aquí a la...
There's a boy here with a black jumper in the corner. First of all, I would like to address a question to James. It has to do with the constraints of Formula One. As a technical director, don't you think that it's a pain in the neck to have so many regulations on aerodynamics and engine maps and so on? Do you think we're losing the essence of Formula One? Second question, addressed to drivers. Do you think it's good for Formula One to have 12 days this month to train for the whole 2013 season?
I'm often asked about regulations, and I don't think that they're a bad thing. I think they're a good thing. on a couple of levels. First of all, they every now and again they change the regulations, and that keeps us all in a job. Because if the regulations were stable, then some time ago we would have homed in on the ultimate car, and that would be the end of it. But more seriously, Formula One is about excellent engineering and about innovation, and innovation is actually more important when the regulations are constrained than they are when the regulations are open. And having constraints on you forces you to think laterally to solve problems. And there are a number of utterly beautiful solutions that have been put forward by Formula One engineers over the years, directly in response to the constraint of a regulation. And it's a lot of what makes the job fun is thinking how to make the car quicker, even though the regulation is more constrained than it was in the past. So no, the regs are good, and they don't make you frustrated.
Graeme, what's your opinion about that?
Well, I agree. I mean, a championship with no regulations would clearly be impossible. And James is right. But when there's a change in regulations, as long as the change isn't too big, there can be some really elegant solutions, and that's when you see the best engineers really come to the forefront. So I personally think the balance is about right.
Giedo, the second part of the question, only 12 days of testing this winter, 6 per driver, it's enough?
Well, of course you want always to drive as much as possible, but that's the rule, so you can't change it. I wish I had a few days more with the team, but it's like this.
És el regla, si no sempre teniu l'exemple del Jaime, que va...
Otherwise you always have the rules or the example of Jaime, who went to Hungary without any testing, and he didn't do that bad. We have time for 2 more questions. This girl in the white jumper. Question addressed to Giedo. You coincided with Charles in GP2. Now that you are together again in a Formula One team, is this positive? To what extent can this be a positive factor, or is this only an anecdote and it doesn't have any relevance?
No, it is positive. I mean, I know Charles from a few years now. I think we were teammates 2011 in Adax, in Spanish team, and I think we work very well together. He's a good guy. The good thing, he has already 1 year experience with Marussia, so I can learn from him on the beginning. I'm sure of that. And so far we work quite good together, and everything's going well.
Una altra, va. El primer ha sigut un noi que està a mitja sala amb ulleres. Es pot posar dret, si us plau? T'arribarà el micròfon. Exacte. I com que aquesta primera ha sigut ràpida, en tindrem una altra de propina i serà l'última.
My question is for James. Is the passive DRS working now? You were testing it last year and it didn't work. And any news about it?
So our extra DRS device, our DDRS, as some people call it, we tried to make it work last year. It's fiercely complicated to make it work. There is a tantalizing gain to be had from it if you can make it work, a gain that you would definitely rather have than not have. But it remains a difficult thing, and we have done a little bit of intermediate work at the last test on getting ready for it. We'll do some more in this test. I don't think at the end of this test we'll be ready to go with it 100%, but I think we'll be an awful lot closer to that point, and I'm fairly hopeful that over the course of this year we will be able to bring it to a race and make it pay.
Last one, ara sí, la última.
Time for one final question. Pole position for this person here with the purple pullover.
Sí, la fila número 6 o 7.
In row 6 or 7?
Espera, t'arribarà el micròfon.
Bona tarda, tinc una pregunta per James i, bueno...
Question for James.
Va estar estudiant l'efecte
Williams
per aplicar-lo als escaps del motor.
Has been studying... sorry, I haven't been able to understand what he said. An effect? An effect? Could you ask him to repeat the question, please? Because
the aerodynamic advantage of the quant exhaust. If you can explain in which consists this system, the quant exhaust.
Explain what it is.
Yes.
All right. I think the question, I'm afraid the translation didn't work fully, but from what I understand, the question was about the Coanda exhaust and what a Coanda exhaust is. If that was the question, I'll briefly describe it. We decided as a sport to get rid of fully blown exhausts back at the end of 2011. When you want to, the best place to blow exhaust on a Formula One car is down in the gap between the rear wheel and the floor. There's a small gap there. If you can get the exhaust to hit that gap in the right way, you get a lot of downforce from it. And in 2011, that's where most cars put their exhaust pipes, right pointing at that gap. So when we decided to get rid of those systems, we did so by enforcing that the exhaust pipes were pulled quite a long way away from that part of the car, and also forcing the exhaust pipes to point upwards at a certain angle. And we hoped when we designed those rules that would largely cure the problem. And we were successful in largely curing the problem, because we don't have anything like the power from the exhaust blowing as we used to have in 2011. However, it was quite quickly realized that even though the exhaust pipes are now a long way away from that magic little gap between the tyre and the floor, even though they're a long way away, you can still get the exhaust to end up pointing down that little gap by using surfaces on the car, which pretty much all the teams are using now, which is called the Coanda surface, and that is exploiting a characteristic of a moving fluid, which is that it wants to stay stuck to a curved surface. So if you blow the exhaust out in the place that the rule forces you to blow it out, at the angle it's forcing you to blow it out at, if you put that exhaust gas right next to a curved surface that dives away and points down at this magic gap in the floor that I talked about, then luckily, fast-moving fluid wants to stick to that curved surface. That's the surface we call the Coanda surface, because this effect of fluid sticking to a curved surface is called the Coanda effect. And by blowing the air onto this curved surface, we can redirect it. And even though it starts a long, long way away from this magic gap and pointing completely in the wrong direction, by the time it's gone over the Coanda surface, it ends up pointing back down in the magic place that we want it to point at, and hey presto, we get a load of downforce from it. So that's what it is.
Bueno, com dirien els anuncis, no intenten hacer.
Well, as the ads would say, don't try to do this at home, because it won't work. We don't have time for more, because, well, all these people need to work hard tomorrow at the Circuit de Catalunya. Tomorrow start the official tests in Barcelona. I'm sure that lots of people had more questions, but we have limited time. Thank you for being here. Thank you as well for those who have been following us over the internet in streaming, and for all of you.
And we wish you very good luck in this season that we start in Australia, Melbourne. Un fort aplaudiment per tots.
A big round of applause for all of you.
Thank you.
I abans de marxar, si voleu un autògraf...
And before you leave, if you would like to have an autograph by the drivers, you can queue orderly here on the left side, and they will sign an autograph for you. Thank you.
No pictures? Què firmen? Fotos o què firmen? On són? Ah, bueno, they bring the pictures. Giedo, thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming to Barcelona.